Well, was Jesus wrong, or did the disciples record the story wrong? Either way, Mark 2:26 maybe creates a crack in this idea of inerrancy for the people who believe that the Bible does not have mistakes. How do we deal with Mark 2:26? Who is the high priest at the time of David? That is the question for today's show. And this actually came from a TikTok video that I saw. And so I'm going to be showing this video and then just kind of explaining how I walk through that and how I respond and how I process through objections like this. That is going to be the show today. It's a short show. It's Friday. I normally don't stream on Friday, but it has been a crazy 2 weeks, which is why I want to give you a quick little update on what's coming up, because I forgot some things and missed some things, and I want to tell you what's going on. But my name is Ryan Pauly. This is the show Think Well, the show that is designed to train you to think well about the Christian faith and the culture so that you can engage the culture well. Today, engaging some Bible problems and how do we deal with some pesky passages, as one TikToker calls them. Now, a quick little update. I said that last week was going to be a show on the evil God hypothesis. That did not happen. The class I was teaching at Biola took way too much time in grading all of the student papers that I was not able to prepare and get a show ready for last week. So that will be postponed until some point in the future. This week, I'm going to do one short TikTok video here on Friday and then take some calls at the end. I have about an hour or so it's going to be a shorter show than normal. And then next week, I said it was going to be next part of our culture series, but that is not true either. Sorry, everyone. I forgot. This book comes out in August. Beyond Evolution by Sai Garte. He is a PhD in biochemistry. He has been the tenured professor of 3 major universities, has held leadership positions at the National Institute of Health and the Uniformed Services University. He's published more than 200 peer-reviewed scientific papers, 5 books, as well as articles on Christianity and science. He's a member of the American Scientific Affiliation. He's an editor-in-chief of the ASA Quarterly online magazine, God and Nature. He was an atheist, and he converted to Christianity later in life. And so that's a little bit about him. This book comes out next month. And so this was sent to me, I think, at the end of last year, and we agreed to do an interview close to the publication date, and I had not put it on the calendar. So next week, July 15, 1:30 p.m. Pacific time, Dr. Sai Garte is going to come on the show, join me, and discuss how new discoveries in the science of life point to God. That is going to be a fun show. Then after that is my next part of the Worldview series, which I don't know where that book went. I think here are my Worldview books. Let's see here. Nope, those are not them. All right, well, I don't know where they went. But it's going to be on media, communication, and journalism, how the Christian intellectual tradition has shaped that space. So that's what's coming up here in the next few weeks. And welcome to the show today. Let me jump in and start this TikTok video, and I'm going to be pausing it throughout. And again, just kind of walking through what the thoughts that come to mind, the questions I have, and I want to kind of give the introduction, and then I'm going to make some introductory comments myself, and then we'll jump into the content, as well as you can join the call live. Let me put I forgot to put the link there. Here's the link in the live chat on YouTube. If you want to join the call live, I'll be taking calls after the video. So let me start the video and show you the introduction here.
The Bible makes no mistakes, friends. The problem is, even Jesus apparently struggled with history class too. Welcome back to Pesky Passages, where your favorite doctrines face serious challenges and we learn to ask better questions along the way.
All right, so let me just pause here really quickly. All right, so you kind of see this is the TikTok account Pesky Passages, and he's going to raise this challenge to help us have better questions. So the first introductory comment that I want to make is this. I love videos like this. I've said this many times on the show, and when I do guest interviews on other shows, I said it twice in other places, but I think that the fact that there are so many content creators out there creating content, trying to raise challenges and objections and questions against doctrines that Christians just grow up believing, I think is great because it forces Christians to take their faith seriously. This is a good thing. Christian students are watching this, the question is, are Christian leaders, adults, pastors, parents, these sort of individuals aware of what people are and students are watching online and know how to respond themselves? Are we creating content that is maybe presenting a different side of the conversation, or at least a response? We often hear objections. Are we hearing counter arguments to those objections? And so I really do appreciate content like this because it forces us to take things seriously and investigate, problems and difficulties with Bible passages and trying to make sense of these issues rather than allowing us to stay in our siloed thinking where we never expose ourselves to problems and we just believe what we believe because that's what we've been told to believe and that's what we have to believe, and end of story. And so first of all, I really do appreciate content like this and I want to engage with it well. At the same time, hopefully, as he wants to raise these challenges to help you question and think well about these issues, I want to help you think well about them too. And so I'm going to present a different perspective than the one that he came to and allow you to kind of make that your mind. That leads me to my second introductory comment here really quickly, and that is this. I think when it comes to Bible contradictions, our presuppositions really matter. And why do I say that? Well, because I feel like no matter what I say in the upcoming video, most Christians are going to listen to it and go, yeah, makes sense. Because it makes sense to me. Like I find this solution and I go, hey, that reconciles at my mind. No longer a problem. And often then there's going to be people who listen to this to go, what, Ryan? No, that makes no sense. What you said doesn't reconcile the problem. It is a contradiction. And so what we find is often we come at this conversation either having a bias toward the Bible, and any sort of attempt to reconcile it goes, all right, sounds good to me, and it's counted as reconciled. Or we possibly have a bias against the Bible, and there's almost no amount of reconciliation that can be done to solve these contradictions. No, they are definitely contradictions. And maybe some of you fall in the middle, where it's really an open-minded, curiosity-seeking, trying to weigh out arguments on both sides, and that's great. I just think that a lot of times our presuppositions really do drive it, or there are other factors that influence how we see arguments or cases as being persuasive. So if you're new to the show, I'm just starting my dissertation. I'm doing my doctorate in practical theology, and I'm writing my dissertation on deconstruction and how do we actually ground students in a deeper, thicker faith that can withstand objections against their faith. And one of the authors that I'm reading makes the argument that, yeah, these objections are not sufficient enough to cause someone to deconstruct. Because if the objection itself was sufficient in causing someone to deconstruct, well, I just watched the objection, I should have deconstructed. And the challenge or the question is, why is it that some people are aware of these objections and deconstruct, and other people are aware of these objections and don't deconstruct? Is there something else? Then there must be something else then at play. And it's not saying it's all bias thinking. It's not just saying that here's what people want. It's not, there's a lot of factors. And this is what I'm just starting to dive into the research on, of all the different factors that lead into it. I just think that offering this video is a attempt to show the other side, another perspective. But I don't find my response to be, I don't think it's going to be persuasive to everybody, as well as maybe the video you're going to watch is not persuasive to everybody, because often we come with our presuppositions. And so at the same time, it's important to address these issues. So I think those are my introductory comments. Let's jump into some of the content in the video, and I'll kind of walk through how I respond. Let's go back.
When someone misquotes the Bible, we usually push back. But what happens if it's Jesus who gets it wrong? Mark 2:25 and 26 read, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need of food? He entered the house of God when Abiathar was high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which it is not lawful for any but the priests to eat, and he gave some to his companions." The story Jesus...
Okay, really quickly. So the first thing I want to do is now he said at the top of the video, said if you want the full context, watch the next video. So I want to say, okay, I want to go to the context and I want to figure out what is happening here. So I pulled up, let me bring it up over here. I pulled up the Bible on my phone, and when I read it, it read differently than what he had said and what he had quoted. And so I pulled up here I'm going to show you on YouTube a bunch of side-by-side parallels from different translations. Let me pull it up here. All right. So I generally use the ESV or the CSB. I don't have the CSB here. I'll show that to you here in a second. Or here, I can show you the CSB if you want, are curious. So I pull up the CSB, and here it is here in the Christian Standard Bible. He entered the house of David in the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for anyone to eat except the priest. And he also gave some to his companions. So here it says, in the time of Abiathar, not when Abiathar was the high priest. It says, in the time of Abiathar, the high priest. So I wanted to look to see what does it say in some other translations. And so I pulled up, I think I clicked on the wrong thing. Oh, here, sorry. I gotta go back here. There we are. So in the ESV, as you can see here on the screen, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar. And now there's a little footnote there that says it can also read, or in the passage about Abiathar. So I said, okay, that's interesting. So what does another translation say? In the NIV, it says he entered the house of God. In the days of Abiathar, the high priest, he entered the house of God. King James Version, how he entered the house of God in the days of Abiathar. NASB, how he entered the house of God in the time of Abiathar. So I reached out to Pesky Passages and I said, what translation are you using that says he went into the house of God when Abiathar was the high priest? And so he responded and said he uses the NRSV UE edition, the New Revised Standard Version Updated edition, where it says how he entered the house of God when Abiathar was the high priest. I said, okay, so now we have the passage that you're using from the translation that they're using. But I did find it curious, at least at this point, that the NRSV UE is the only translation that translates this as when he entered the house when Abiathar was the high priest. And instead, all the other translations say in the time of Abiathar, in the time of Abiathar, in the time. So that's the first question that comes to my mind is now, how do I go back to the original languages and understand what was taking place? For this, a helpful tool is BibleHub.com. If you're not aware of BibleHub.com, have it here up on the screen. This is really nice because you can type in any Bible verse in the search bar, and then there's a little tab here at the top that says interlin, and this gives you the interlinear. Where here on the screen, you can see that it gives me Mark 2:26, and it gives you all the Greek and then how they get translated. And so you can see here on the screen how he entered into the house of God in the days of this Greek word Abiathar. So you can click here and say, okay, I want to understand this word a little bit more. So let me click here on the 1909, where I now have the concordance that gives me all the information. Here's the original word. Here it is a preposition, translation, transliteration is epi. There's how you pronounce it, phonetic spelling. In the KJV, here's all the different ways that that specific Greek word is translated in different passages. In the NASB, it's translated as over, against, before, toward, about, basis, concerning. It has different types of uses, and it gives you all of that information. All right, so I'm going to come back to this here in just a second. And so at this point, I think it's helpful. And what I'm trying to do is say, okay, you cited a verse. You are claiming it's going to be contradictory to something. Let me just understand its proper context. Let me just look at it myself rather than taking your word for it. And hopefully you're also looking into this yourself and not just taking my word for it. Let's look into things, not just take content creators' word for it. Let's try to look at the context, try to understand the translation, what's going on here. And now let's continue on with, now how is Mark 2:26 contradictory? Let's continue.
This references there is from 1 Samuel 21. And the high priest in this story isn't Abiathar, it's Ahimelech. Abiathar only shows up after Saul slaughters the priests, and he's remembered mostly later for political drama under David and Solomon. So,
all right, so here's what's helpful. Okay, so he lays out the contradiction. Let me pull it up here. All right, so here is Mark 2:26, where it says, again, Jesus is speaking. He says to them, there's the red letters. Have you not read what David did when he entered the house in the time of Abiathar, the high priest? If you click over here to 1 Samuel, 1 Samuel chapter 21, David went to the priest Ahimelech at Nob. Ahimelech was afraid to meet David, and he said to him, why are you alone and no one is with you? David answered the priest, Ahimelech, The king gave me permission, but he told me, don't let anyone know anything about the mission I'm sending you on or what I have ordered you to do. I have stationed my young men at a certain place. Now, what do you have to hand? What do you have on hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread or whatever can be found. The priest told him, there is no ordinary bread on the hand. However, there is a consecrated bread, but the young men may eat it only if they have kept themselves from women. And David answered. Okay, so the point here is that in 1 Samuel 21, Ahimelech is the high priest. So why is it then in Mark 2:26 it says that Abiathar was the high priest? Or in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, this is what happened. That is where I think this matters. And I think this conversation is important, is understanding translations in what can be possible. So I reached out to the content creator and I said this. I said, okay, let me pull up my thing here. I said, okay, if all of these translations translate epi as in the days of, not when Abiathar was high priest, but in the days of Abiathar, the high priest, would you accept that as a possible translation? Here is his response. First, I have to say I don't fully understand the original Greek, so I can't speak authoritatively on this at all. Love that admission. I think most people don't fully understand original Greek unless they are New Testament scholars and have really learned Greek. Hungry, yes, you can ask something. Type it in the live chat and I'll get to it. And so, yes, I think most of us are at that point. I'm at that point too. I took a little bit of Greek in order to do research into Greek, not in order to read or understand or even translate Greek. All right, so what he says, but from what I've gathered, I don't have a huge problem with using in the time of. Okay, so he doesn't have a problem translating epi as in the time of instead of when he was priest, but in the time of Abiathar, the high priest. As long as, though, we're not letting it gloss over the fact when this combination of grammar is used in these specific senses, the genitive, it refers to when the person held the named office. I just think we could be more accurately translated as something like during the tenure of. There is specificity here that could be lost in the time of translation. All right, so his concern is that if you translate it as in the time of, then you can lose some specificity that really, I think, resolves this conflict. And instead, when he says, when you see this grammar used in the genitive, then you have it specifically meaning when this person held office. And so for this, I want to go back and I want to look at the Strong's Concordance. I want to look at the concordance in the lexical summary and say, okay, what does this say about the genitive case? As you see right here, it can be properly meaning in the genitive case as a relation of or distribution. There's a dative case and there's an accusative case. Okay, so what does it say here about the genitive case? Well, for that, you got to scroll down quite a bit to all of the Greek lexicon's information on how this word is used in different cases. And here is what you can see. Now, where was it? I had it highlighted, but of course that went away. All right, where was it? I'm looking. Oh, here we go. In the time of. All right, so if you're going to look at this and say, let's use the translation in the time of, it says, with the genitive of a person in the time of or age of a man. So in the days of. It can also mean at the time when an office was held by one or under the administration. And here's some verses in scripture of where it is used differently. And so here's the point is, according to this lexicon, it can mean in the days of, or it can mean when that office was held. And so my response back to this, to Pesky Passages was, why do you think it has to be only when the office was held? As he says here, I'll go back to this. As he says here, it needs to say when it's genitive, it refers to when a person held the named office. It can mean that. But as I showed you here, it can also mean, make that go away. It can also mean just in the days of that person. So it can be both. Why not the first? Now, here's, I think, the helpful understanding is just because it can mean something, it doesn't mean it does mean that thing, right? Just because the word bat can mean a baseball bat or a flying animal bat doesn't mean you can just import any meaning you want onto it. Really, the context has to be understood. The question, though, is if we're going to say that this is a true or a clear Bible contradiction, I'm curious about the argument of why it has to mean when the office was held, versus how a lot of other commentators, theologians, and translators say, no, it's just talking about in the time of Abiathar. Now, why is this important? Well, notice what he says here in the video. Actually, let me rewind just a little bit.
Calling him high priest high priest in the story isn't Abiathar, it's Ahimelech. Abiathar only shows up after Saul slaughters the priests, and he's remembered mostly later for political drama under David and Solomon.
Okay, so Abiathar was the only priest that survived the slaughter, and he became popular. He became known because of being the only priest that survived Saul's slaughter, that escaped the slaughtering of all the priests by Saul. So here's the question. If Ahimelech was not as well known, and Abiathar was very well known, as he said here, he became very well known later on. If Jesus is trying to give the people an understanding of when something happens, what would make the most sense to say this happened when Ahimelech was the high priest? And the people go, okay, when was Ahimelech high priest? I don't remember exactly. Or this happened in the days of Abiathar, right? You remember in the time that Abiathar lived? Oh yeah, we all know Abiathar. He was famous, as he says right here in the video. He was famous. He's the one that escaped Saul's persecution and slaughter of the priests. He was the one that became well known in David's area. Okay, so in the time of Abiathar, at that time period in history, this is when David went in to the temple and ate the bread of the presence, or when this event took place. And so we know that Abiathar, his father was Ahimelech. So Abiathar's his son. And so I think that, to me, a solution to this is to say, okay, this can mean in the time of. The genitive does not require it to be when exactly he held office, but it's talking about in the days of Abiathar, the high priest. You remember Abiathar, the high priest? Well, in the days in which he was alive, because he's Abimelech's son, this is when David did this. And so I think that when you recognize Jesus is making a generalization to give people an understanding of the time in which this took place. We do this all the time in normal language. And this is one of my challenges with a lot of claimed Bible contradictions, is they often do not allow for the normal use of general statements that we make every day, and are looking for extreme precision in every possible statement. But we just don't speak like that, right? Where we say, man, I always do this. Oh, really? You always do that? No, you don't. It's like, oh, yes, I'm making an exaggeration to try to show a point. Or we sometimes do this too. Yeah. In the time when Abraham Lincoln was president, or, in the time of Abraham Lincoln, the president, it's like in that time, I'm just trying to give you a general time frame to give you an understanding, not necessarily making these extreme historical precise statements. And so here's the question. If that's at least possible, if this is a possible interpretation and understanding of the passage, then I don't see how this is a pesky passage or a clear Bible contradiction. Now, people often have pushed back against me and said, well, in that sense, then nothing is a contradiction, because you could give a possible interpretation of any passage, and therefore you can just explain away every single possible contradiction by giving a possible interpretation. Well, this is where you have to say, okay, does the explanation make sense? Right? If you look at the Greek, if you look at the language, if you look at how it was translated, if you look at the context, does this stretch everything? Does this go beyond what is reasonable? Or would you say, oh, that's reasonable? And if it's reasonable, then this cannot be a clear contradiction, if there is a reasonable solution to it. Then it's like, okay, well, then this doesn't destroy biblical inerrancy, because there can be a conclusion that we come to. The question is, why not this conclusion? Why not translate it this way? All right, let me finish up the rest of his video, and then I'm going to get to your questions and calls.
So calling him high priest during David's visit isn't just a technical error. It rewrites who was alive, in power, and present.
So notice that again. So we're going back to that translation to say, calling him high priest when this happened. If we take the NRSV UE, when Abiathar was high priest, versus in the days of Abiathar, the high priest. Remember that guy, the high priest? In the days in which he was alive, this happened. Then this contradiction he claims here to say you are rewriting history is not, doesn't apply if we have that understanding.
If you are the type that believes that these are the actual literal words of God, that raises a bigger problem. Either Jesus got it wrong, or the words that the author of Mark put into Jesus's mouth are wrong.
So I think that's a false dichotomy. It's not either Jesus got it wrong or the writer that is putting words in Jesus' mouth got it wrong. I would say that, as I've said, that Jesus was making a generalization, taking the person who was more popular, as this content creator even admitted, and helping people understand when these things took place in the days of Abiathar. So I don't think Jesus was wrong, and I don't think the writer of Mark was wrong. I think that we are trying to take a too literal of a reading and exact precision based on a possible mistranslation. And so again, you can look to see if I made a case for that, persuasive or not. But there's a third option here, is that Jesus was not speaking in the way that this content creator says he was, by saying Abiathar was the high priest at this time versus in the days of Abiathar.
Apparently, that tension wasn't lost on early Christians and later gospel writers, because when the authors of Matthew and Luke tell that exact same story in their respective gospels, they correct the mistake by quietly omitting the priest's name completely. For people taught that the Bible...
So notice this. I didn't go into Matthew and Luke. I was just trying to focus specifically on what the contradiction is. But notice it's like, if you start with the presupposition that this is a legit contradiction, then Matthew and Luke have to, I have to omit this. I have to try to correct a mistake, versus, well, maybe they just didn't include the priest's name because they didn't think it was important because they're just focused on David. There's a lot of different possibilities. But if we start with the presupposition of this, or the conclusion, if we say, okay, this is a true contradiction, now all of a sudden we have to attach wrong motive to Matthew and Luke to say, well, then they must have omitted it. They're trying to hide something. They're trying to correct a mistake, versus, no, this wasn't a mistake and they just didn't include the priest's name for whatever reason. So just like if I said, during the president or whatever, and I just don't give you what president, and I don't know why I would say that, but there's a lot of different possibilities that they would write it the way that they wrote it without specifically trying to cover up mistakes.
Is flawless. A singular event like this can not only be confusing, it can be uncomfortably disorienting.
So I would agree. It can be confusing, right? When you read one and you read the other, like, it's confusing. And that's why hopefully a study of scripture prompts questions. I've been having this conversation lately with individuals of, like, all these people that do Bible studies, but then they have no questions. I'm like, but you're like meeting every single week and you're studying scripture and you're looking at it. How does that not prompt questions? How do you not see these things that just go, wait a second, that just doesn't make sense? I think naturally, as we study scripture, as we're in discipleship relationships, it should be prompting questions within us as we hit these pesky passages, as we hit these uncomfortable or things that, wait, that doesn't quite click. And that should drive us to go deeper to understand, okay, what's going on here and how do I make sense of this? And so I think that I would agree that, yeah, these things do on the surface, they are disorienting and they do create some questions, hopefully, if we are not just glossing over problems and we're wanting to read the Bible seriously. I just think that there are good answers when you dive into them.
Because when even Jesus misremembers a story, it's not just a name that's in question. It's the foundation you were told never to question. And if you're...
And that's what I also want to say. If it's a foundation you were told never to question, I want you to question it. When I taught high school, I had a box in my room that says, put your questions in here. Ask any question about the Bible, Christianity, faith. That's why I invite callers to join the show. Let's question this. Let's ask good questions. And so hopefully if you come from the background that says, do not ask any questions, hopefully that sends up some red flags. And is disorienting itself, and we go, hold on a second, why don't you want me asking any questions? Why can't we hear the other side? I want to open ourselves up to questions. Now, this came up in a different conversation today where I retold the story to a different individual that I've told here on the show before, of that we had a colleague of Richard Dawkins, the famous evolutionary biologist who works with Richard Dawkins. We invited her and paid her to come speak to a group of Christian students. And she was shocked. Like, wow, Christians are wanting an evolutionary biologist who works with Richard Dawkins to come in and challenge them and speak to them and present something that they disagree with. She then was invited to 3 different skeptic atheist groups to speak. She wanted to give the same presentation she gave to this Christian group, my Christian group, on why things that you believe are probably false. And the atheist skeptic group says, no, we're not interested. We don't want to hear about why we might believe false things. And so she drew the conclusion, isn't that interesting that it was the Christians who are more open-minded and willing to question things than the atheists? And so that doesn't ring true of every atheist and every Christian. There are closed-minded Christians, and I think there are closed-minded atheists. And hopefully we find open-minded individuals that say, I want to ask questions. I want to read the other side. And so with one individual that I was talking with, it was like, okay, you're challenging my views on evolution and why I think it's false. Well, here's the evolutionists I've talked to. Here's the books on evolution I've read. What books on creation have you read? Well, none. Now, that doesn't mean I'm right and they're wrong. It's just the question is, are we all taking the same approach of wanting to ask good questions that challenge our views and present and find the best, most intellectual, most thoughtful people on the other side and actually listen to them as if we had something to learn from them and not just simply to try to prove them wrong? I think that's a good question to ask. And that's why I love videos and content like this that force Christians to deal with difficulties in scripture that they may not just see reading on their own. Because if you're not comparing 1 Samuel 21 to Mark chapter 2, when you're reading it, you just read Mark chapter 2. You're like, okay, yeah, this happened when Abiathar was high priest. And then you read 1 Samuel, you're like, okay, Abimelech was high priest. And you're maybe not even like putting 2 and 2 together that, okay, hold on a second, these seem to be different. And so I like this, and hopefully I want to challenge you to ask good questions too.
Theology depends on historical perfection to prove divine authority. This verse quickly becomes a liability. Cue the Apologetics Gymnastics.
So I'm just curious. You can comment in the live chat. You can comment on the video. Do you think what I have done is apologetics gymnastics? Think if you're in like a criminal trial. You have a defense attorney and a prosecuting attorney. And you only hear the prosecuting attorney try to use all the evidence to show why this person is guilty. And then the defense attorney comes and says, hold on a second, jury. Don't just take their word for it. There's another story. There's another explanation. And they go, cue the defense attorney gymnastics. Or is it actually that the defense attorney is looking at the evidence and actually drawing a better picture, creating a better story, creating a better a look at the evidence of drawing these truths out rather than reading into it? And so that's where hopefully, rather than discrediting the other side by saying, here's the skeptical gymnastics or here's the apologetics gymnastics, we're saying, hey, here's both sides. What do you think? And just because I come along as an apologist and try to make sense of this and try to dig into the Greek and the grammar, does that mean I'm automatically doing apologetic gymnastics? Or is it that I'm actually giving an explanation to something and resolving a conflict that's not actually there? I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on how you think this went.
But maybe the problem isn't with the Bible itself. Maybe it's the expectations we've placed on it. Some foundations just weren't meant to hold that kind of weight. At some point, we have to stop being afraid to adapt our definitions of inspired and inerrant into something deeper and more beautiful. Or, for the sake of the cracking foundation, we have to simply admit that they're not working and throw them out entirely. As always, you don't have to agree with me. But when you're confronted with new information, you do have to wrestle with it. I'd love to.
And I would fully agree, right? We don't have to agree with him, but when we're confronted with new information, we have to wrestle with it. Here's why I go back to the first comment I made on presuppositions, and it matters, is yes, absolutely. If I believe that the Bible is inerrant, is without error, then it is going to cause me to try to reconcile passages that seem to be contradictory. Absolutely. The question is this: do I have any reason for believing the Bible is inerrant? Right? So if you have overwhelming reason to believe that this person is guilty, just because some piece of evidence seems to or could be shown to point to him being innocent, you obviously don't want to just dismiss it and go, no, I'm ignoring all the evidence that disagrees with me. He's guilty. That would be bad. But if you go, well, this one piece of evidence seems to suggest he's innocent, so therefore I guess I need to throw out my understanding of him being guilty and say he's innocent. Well, that would equally be bad. If you have overwhelming evidence, I mean, listen to attorneys and they'll talk about this and detectives, is that there are unexplained things. Hey, we don't know how to make sense of this. But just because we don't know how to make sense of one thing does not override or cancel out the overwhelming amount of evidence that we have pointing to someone being guilty. So again, if you have video surveillance of someone committing a murder, and you have eyewitness testimony, and you have their own testimony, and you have written testimony, I mean, you have every single piece of evidence to be a clear-cut, knockdown case. This person is guilty. They committed the murder. And then there's like, but there is this one thing that we don't know how to make sense of. Do you use that and say, well, I guess all this mountain of evidence gets thrown out because this one thing I can't make sense of? Or do you go, I can't make sense of it. Okay, but I still have good reason to believe that he is guilty. I think the same thing can happen here. The question is, what reason do Christians have of believing the Bible is inerrant? And if we have good reasons for believing the Bible is inerrant, then if there's passages like this that I reconcile, it's not just me pulling an apologetic gymnastics or dismissing things. It's, yes, we come at everything with our presuppositions. The question is, do we have any good reason to believe our presuppositions are true? And are we using faulty presuppositions to dismiss credible evidence, or are we using it to make sense of other things? And we always use what is clear to make sense of what is difficult. And there are some things that may remain confusing, other things that we can make sense of, but we all come with presuppositions. Versus if we come with the presupposition that, yeah, the Bible's not the inspired word of God, then we're often not going to accept the conclusions that the apologist gives on how to reconcile passages, and we still think that they are, there is still a problem here. And so that's the question that I often want to get back to in conversations, is what is grounding the presuppositions that then is informing this conversation that we're having? What is the starting point that is really driving why are we seeing this passage in two completely different ways? That, to me, is a much more fascinating conversation than simply just arguing over the passage. It's like, hold on a second. Why are we seeing this in different ways? What presuppositions do we have, and what is driving that understanding? This happens a lot. Next week, we'll be talking about this book on evolution. This happens a lot with evolution. I'm talking to someone right now on the evidence for evolution, and it often starts with, well, there is no God. You can't prove there's a God. There is no God. There is no creator. Evolution's true. It's like, okay, I would agree with you that if there is no God, evolution is the best game in town. But that's the presupposition we got to come back to, is it even possible that a creator exists? And if not, well, then of course you're not going to accept any conclusion I give you that there's a creator or that God created. But we have to go back to that prior presupposition. Let me continue.
Hear how you answer these questions. If this really was a mistake, how do you reconcile that with a belief in biblical inerrancy? Do a handful of errors unravel the whole thing? Or just challenge us in how we've been taught to read it? What kind of hermeneutic allows you to take the Bible seriously without needing it to be flawless? Could understanding how the Bible was written, compiled, and edited help us read it more wisely today? You don't have to pretend that the cracks aren't there. You just have to ask whether your faith is strong enough to survive without covering them up. If it can, that's the kind of faith that can exist while holding contradiction. And in my opinion, that's worth holding on to.
I love that final comment. Do you have a faith that is strong enough to survive? That's exactly what my dissertation is on, is how do we create a thick faith that can withstand these problems or these questions or these challenges and not just crack instantly. And so that's what I'm working on right now. And that's what I'm working through. So anyways, hopefully this is helpful as I just kind of try to walk through how I deal with this. I'm trying to look at, okay, what is the context? What translation's using? Why are things translated the way they are? Are there other reasonable interpretations? What is the, context point to? And that's how at least I would address this challenge. All right, Nitty, welcome. I see some questions here. So let me jump to your questions. And then again, everybody, I have about 20 minutes or so. If you want to jump in and call and chat with me, you can, or post your questions in the live chat and I will work through these one at a time. Would you look at a verse in the Quran in the same way as this in Mark? I try to. I definitely try to. You'd have to point out exactly what verse it is. I want to look at both sides. So this just happened. I took a group to a mosque in Colorado where the imam there presented some verses and said, all right, here's how to understand these verses. And it was very clear. And then afterwards I said, okay, so here's another Muslim who would understand the verses this way. And so the question is, okay, here you have two Muslims that are contradicting each other on how to understand this verse. We then have to go back and have to do the work and try to understand which Muslim, which imam is actually understanding this verse correctly. And so I try to present a fair case. I lead trips. I'm going to Utah in 2 weeks, and I have frequently where people will present a book out of the book of, or a verse out of the Book of Mormon. and say, see, clearly this is false. And I will often push back and say, hold on a second. That's not how they're going to understand that. They're going to understand it this way. So do you think that's as clear cut mic drop moment as you think it is? Or are you actually taking a misreading of that verse? Because we as Christians don't like it when people do that to our Bible. If it's like, well, you can't figure it out. Faith or works? Well, Paul says one, James says another. It's like, hold on a second. Don't just throw this out there like it's a problem that no Christian has dealt with. And we have to treat other religious people with that same level of respect, that we don't like it when people come to us, pull a verse out of context and throw it at us. We should not do it to them. So I try to look at verses in the Quran in the same way. And again, if people hear me speaking and they're like, hey, you're not being equally fair, then that's something to call out in me. But that is a goal that I have. You said it's a false dichotomy with evolution. I'm not sure what the false dichotomy is. I was just simply saying that if someone does not believe that a God exists and there is no creator, then you obviously are not going to hold to a creation perspective. And then the question is, how do we make sense of our biological evidence if creator is off the table? And I think at that point, evolution does fit the evidence best. It's the best current explanation for how to make sense of the evidence if the creator is off the table. If you, though, take the stance and say, is there a common creator or a common ancestor? And those are both options. And you look at the evidence, I think the conclusion would be differently. So I think that's a good thing. Shiloh, good to see you here. So Shiloh is one of our, you kind of said that. Is one of our speakers in Utah, one of our Mormons that come in and speak to our group. And so again, we bring in, Shiloh is a real LDS member. And so we don't just say, hey, here's my Christian view, take my word for it. Here's what Mormons believe, and never actually talk to a Mormon to see if that's true. We bring in members of the LDS church. We bring in atheists. We bring in Muslims. We bring in people who actually disagree with us. We bring in Richard Dawkins' colleague who actually disagrees with us to challenge our students, because we want them to hear from people who actually hold the beliefs themselves and address the actual thing. So Nitty, if I teach my students about some verse in the Quran and go, oh, it has to mean this, which I did. I said, hey, here's a verse that I think is problematic for Muslims. You should ask the imam. And so when we got to the mosque, my students asked the imam, said, hey, this verse seems to be a problem for you. How do you understand this? I'm like, I love that. Here's one that seems to be a problem, but I want to hear your explanation. I want to hear how you make sense of this. And I want to consider your perspective. I think that's great. And so that's what we try to do. Even your atheist interlocutor is using poor logic. Not sure which atheist interlocutor you're talking about. Shiloh, looking really forward to being out in Utah as well. Thank you for trying to steel man our positions. That's our goal. I know that's very rare, but here's the point I often try to make is that if what you believe is true, you should be able to steel man. You should be able to build the strongest, best possible opposing view and still defeat it because your view actually is true and better. And instead, if you have to use logical fallacies, if you have to use misrepresentations and strawmen and all this kind of stuff in order to defeat a view, I think that actually makes your view look less reliable. And so that is our goal, and that's what we love doing. So excited to be out there with you here in a couple weeks, Shiloh. Looking forward to it. All right. Again, if you want to call in, the link should be there at the top of the live chat. You should be able to click on that. I can pin it for you as well if you want to. I'll wait a few more minutes. I got 15. I'll wait a few more minutes if anyone wants to put a question in the live chat or call in, and I will be happy to chat with you. Again, next week, Dr. Saigarte, Beyond Evolution, How New Discoveries in the Science of Life Point to God. That's going to be a fun conversation. It's not this Christian Worldview book. This is one we did last or 2 weeks ago, but a book on media, journalism, and communication, how the Christian intellectual tradition has shaped that is coming up next. If you want to get some Think Well merch, check it out. If you're still here at the end of a show, and it means that hopefully you found this show to be valuable. And so if you want to continue to help and support and promote this show, you can do so by liking, subscribing, sharing. You can support financially if you want to as well. Think-well.org is the website where you can get a lot more information on what it looks like to support the show, or support through buying merch, or all that kind of fun stuff. But hopefully, if you're still here, you think this is something that is valuable And so I would love your help in spreading the information. It's not that I make a bunch of money. I don't. People often ask me or accuse me of just doing this for the YouTube money. And they do so on videos that make me like 2 cents. If you notice, I've taken all ads. I don't only have the required ads at the beginning, but there are no mid-roll ads. There's no bumper ads. There's none of that stuff. I just want to give you the content, make it free, not filled with promotions. And so if you're here and you'd enjoyed it, feel free to connect or support. All right. So I don't see any other questions or comments. I don't see any calls. So I am going to sign off. But again, next week, Beyond Evolution, Dr. Sai Garte on Tuesday, 1:30 p.m. Pacific time for a fun conversation on evolution. So bring your questions, bring your challenges, and it is going to be a good time. With that, have a wonderful weekend, and I'll see you guys in just a few days on Tuesday. Bye, everybody, and continue to think deeply about these things because they are worth thinking about. Oh, here you go. Sorry. Almost. And then a question came in. Shiloh asked the question, do you have any book recommendations for apologetics books? All right. So this is always really hard because yes, there are some general apologetics, but I much prefer specific topics. So I often will say, okay, if you want like a general apologetic, there's I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek that kind of just starts at like, does truth exist, all the way to does God exist? And that's kind of a general apologetic that kind of introduces you to a lot of different topics. But I often find that the specific books by specific scholars to be a lot more valuable and interesting. And so I often will say, well, what sort of apologetics books are you looking for? Are you looking for books on God's existence? Are you looking for books on the moral argument or on science and evolution, or are you looking for apologetics on other faiths or whatever it may be? And so that's where I often have on my website. Let me see if I can pull this up really fast and I can put it in the live chat. My website, I have a recommendation list. I haven't updated it for a little bit. Let me see how quickly I can get to this. My computer's been really, really slow. I have a recommendations page on my website that at least kind of has a general starting point. Here we go. And I'll post this in the live chat on YouTube. If you're listening on podcast or radio, sorry, you can't see this. There's a link to my recommendations page. Let me see if I can, I'm not going to pull it up, but I have books. So like if you're just getting started, Tactics by Greg Kokel is a good intro on like how to have these conversations. I think Cultural Intelligence by Daryl Bach really shows how we need to engage the culture well. It's like a primer for just cultural engagement. I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist by Frank Turek is another good getting started book. If you're looking for books on science, Icons of Evolution by Jonathan Wells, More Than a Theory, Hugh Ross, The Genesis Debate, if you're wanting like, how do we understand Genesis, young earth, old earth, The Genesis Debate by Duncan Hall, Ross Archer, Irons, and Klein was really good. There's kind of philosophy and apologetics, Why God Allows Evil, Clay Jones, Scientism and Secularism, J.P. Moreland, When Skeptics Ask by Norm Geisler. That's a great book, overview of everything. Cold Case Christianity, J. Warner Wallace, books on other religions, youth worker books, culture books, Practical Guide to Culture, Brett Kunkle, John Stone Street, Mere Sexuality by Todd Wilson, Chasing Love by Sean McDowell. This is some good stuff. All right. I'm interested in mainstream Christian history. For instance, how do modern mainstream Christians that break from creedal ideas wrestle with the idea of breaking from historic Christian beliefs? For instance, if you reject classical theism, even though that has generally been the mainstream view. That's a good question. I know Classic Christian Thinkers by Ken Samples kind of gets into more of a history, but not necessarily mainstream. That goes back to old thinkers and gives something. Shiloh, let me think about that, and I'll get back to you on that, or I'll chat with you in Utah here in a few weeks and see what books I can come up with off the top of my head. All right, so with that, continue to think deeply about these things because they are worth thinking about. Have a great weekend, everybody, and I'll see you on Tuesday. Bye.